And good afternoon, and welcome to the first installment of our Let's Talk Conversations on Justice series. On behalf of the YWCA, I want to thank you for joining us here today. Over the next several months, we'll be taking a journey across the vast landscape of social justice issues. And we've created this virtual space to safely gather, to listen, to learn, to reflect, and ultimately to take action and make lasting change. For generations, the mission of the YWCA has been to eliminate racism, empower women and girls, and to promote peace, justice, dignity, and freedom for all. We are but one organization, and it takes people like you joining us here today to help move the needle and move things forward. It's our honor to be joined today by another like-minded organization dedicated to creating a more just and equitable world. Please join me in welcoming Cindy Rogowski of Meyer. Cindy, welcome.
Thank you, Charisse. I'm honored to be here today. My name is Cindy Rogowski, and I serve as the Vice President of the YWCA Board of Directors, and I'm also an Associate General Counsel at Meyer. Meyer champions a culture of inclusion for people of all backgrounds. From the beginning, it was a priority for our founders, Hendrik and Fred Meyer, to create a safe and healthy environment rooted in dignity and respect. Our culture of inclusion informs how we support and connect with our teams, our customers, and our communities, including doing our part in the fight against systematic racism and inequality. As we partner to enrich lives in the communities we serve, we truly appreciate the importance of the YWCA and its mission. Meyer is proud to be a catalyst for inclusion, and we are intentional about our commitment to DEI work throughout West Michigan and beyond. Meyer is pleased to join the YWCA for the first annual Let's Talk Conversations on Justice series as its presenting sponsor. These conversations with local experts are critical, timely, and essential for making equity possible for all. The first installment of this conversation series focuses on racism as a public health crisis. As the country has witnessed over the past several years, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities encounter disparities and inequity. We know that systematic racism exists in our everyday structures, creating unjust outcomes and furthering the divide. Today, we're pleased to offer a dynamic dialogue among some of the top voices in our community who are working on this challenge, who are working on challenging this system and creating lasting change for generations to come. This discourse can be challenging, but it is necessary. We are pleased that you're joining us today and hope you'll continue with us on this journey. Thank you, and let's talk.
Thank you, Cindy. We are grateful for Meyer's commitment to the YWCA and the work that we do. I'd also like to take an opportunity to give a heartfelt thank you to our supporting sponsors who have helped make the Let's Talk Conversations on Justice possible. Our sponsors are Steelcase, Fifth Third Bank, Mercy Health St. Mary's, and Grand Valley State University's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department. We are humbled by your partnership and dedication to making our community more inclusive and just for everyone. As many of you know, YWCA's dedication to domestic and sexual violence work has been at the forefront of our mission. But what many of you may not know is that one of our key pillars is rooting out and eliminating racism in all systems. Addressing this vital part of our mission's goal requires us to first recognize that something needs to be fixed, to name the problem, and then develop a strategy to begin revising it. Today's conversation focuses on just that. For far too long, communities of color have been disenfranchised, disinvested in, have lacked adequate access to equitable health care, and persistent poor health outcomes, mortality, morbidity in BIPOC communities are the price we pay for not fully addressing systemic racism. While these are not new problems, the events of the recent years have brought these issues out of the shadows and into the spotlight. And today we're privileged to be joined by members within our own community here in West Michigan who are doing the work in real and meaningful ways. We hope that you will walk away from today's conversation not only inspired, but also leave equipped with numerous tools in your tool belt to create a sustainable action plan for change. Our team recognizes that we are here just a short time, but it is our hope that we can address this topic in a direct and authentic way. So before we fully immerse ourselves in this conversation, I'd like to introduce you to today's panelists. We are joined by Tracy Brame, Associate Dean and Director of the Innocence Project at Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. Becky Diffin, the YWCA's Director of the Domestic Violence Supportive Housing Program. Vanessa Green, CEO of the Grand Rapids African American Health Institute. Dr. Karen Kennedy, Primary Care Regional Medical Director for Mercy Health Physician Partners. And Lionel Legrone with the NAACP and Equity and Compliance Coordinator at Hope College. So welcome all, we're thrilled that you're here. So I'd like to open with a question just posed to the group and for anyone who would like to help get us started today. So here's the question. The City of Grand Rapids has declared racism as a public health crisis in September of 2021. So what are some ways that you've seen racism manifest in the communities that you serve, in the spaces that you occupy, and the individuals and communities that you serve?
I think we all have a lot to say, so I will just start by saying that in our direct healthcare community, we've seen quite a few things in this space having to do with inequity based on race. And I could start anywhere, but I remember years ago when the opioid crisis was an issue, not that long ago, we were uncovering a lot of things having to do with the perception of pain in the healthcare realm. Studies have shown, this is not just me saying it, but studies have shown that the healthcare community in general tends to think that Black people, for example, do not feel pain in the same way that others do, and they have a higher pain tolerance. So this became a huge issue even years ago when we were dealing with opioids, narcotic medications such as Vicodin, oxycodone, some others that you may know, to help and control pain. But we were also trying to make sure that we kept people safe and make sure that they didn't become addicted to it. So you can see that this is a problem if there are people who are in pain and need certain medications but aren't getting it, both because of trying to control the opioid crisis and maybe a misconception about what persons are experiencing, what kind of pain. So that's one big way that it was displayed, the racism was displayed. Another big way that racism was shown in the healthcare community was that when you are under the threat of racism and you've experienced it for so long, it leads to depression and anxiety, which leads to other healthcare issues, stomach pain, headache, and otherwise. But also anxiety can express itself as anger, and that anger can play out in violence as well. So we're seeing different things in the healthcare realm that can spill out into other aspects of society too, that we needed to try and control and to understand, not just to label someone as a violent person, but to understand that they may be undergoing anxiety or other things as well. I can go on and on. I can allow other people to speak, but the last thing I'll mention is that racism breeds mistrust in the system. So in this past couple of years with the COVID pandemic, even trying to get information out about vaccines, or if the virus was even a true thing. I mean, there were so many things that came up in the last couple of years. It may have been harder to reach certain populations that had been shunned by the health community in the past because of their race or because of their ethnicity. So they may not have listened in the same way that another ethnicity may have listened as well. So we may have had things to give to them, but they were not necessarily receptive to us at that time. So racism plays out in different ways. I may have answered that a little bit differently than people have expected, but I do have to mention that those are the top things that I can think of off the top of my head.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. It reminds me of something that a student said to me the other day, which I began to think about. She said that the racist atmosphere in West Michigan threatens our psychological safety. And we began to process that, and it when you follow the road down psychological safety, it actually comes back to the depression, anxiety, the mistrust, and effectively what Andrew Hacker noted in his book, and I think it was 85, Two Nations, when he said the United States was moving toward two nations, one black, one white, and those two nations were separate, hostile, and unequal. There's actually, because of the diminishing of the disintegration of the psychological safety of our Black and brown citizens due to consistently being faced with racism, there is a divide in how things are perceived. What is, we're going to talk about the criminal justice system and employment, et cetera, as we go down the list of questions today. But effectively, what's happening here is there is one way to accomplish things when you're a person of color and one way when you're not. And that way, when you're a person of color, is not necessarily in alignment with the law and the policy that you're told is there to protect you and to guide you and prescribe and promulgate, but it is you move in a way that will ensure your survival so that you can alleviate death. And that is the bottom line when it comes to psychological safety, because we don't believe that we're trusted. We believe that we're always looked at as being deceptive. And once you are in a position where you can literally get killed by a police officer and nothing happens, I mean, that does a lot to impact the individual and the community.
That is wonderful. Thank you both so much for opening up this conversation with that focus on our health, our survival, not just our physical, but also our emotional, psychological safety and health, and the fight for life, which is so critically important. And I think that leads to a really great opening question for Ms. Green and for Dr. Kennedy, kind of focusing on the health system. So for so many communities of color, access to healthcare frequently is just not a reality, even though it's deemed as a right. So how does declaring racism a public health crisis help change this? And critically, what are some of the systemic changes or solutions from a healthcare or health systems perspective that could address that issue?
Thank you. And I'd like to thank Dr. Kennedy and Lionel for leading this conversation. And just from the issue of, can you repeat the question? I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. You can answer whatever question you want to ask, but here's the question or answer whatever question you'd like. But here's the question as I posed it. What are some of the systematic and systemic changes or solutions from a healthcare or health systems perspective that could address the issue of just the lack of access to equitable healthcare?
So thank you. I'd first like to talk about the lack of access to healthcare, and then talk about some solutions. So thank you for repeating the question. But lack of access, it's like a century age issue that we have been experiencing as a nation. And it impacts every aspect of a person's wellness. Is when we don't have the basic access to the needs that we're experiencing related to our health. And one of the things that I share, often, and because I carry this deeply in my heart, and that is just growing up, a lot of lack of access is rooted in a number of things that's related to social determinants of health, poverty, education, where we live, all of those things are really impact our access and are all rooted in the historic racism that we have experienced in our society. And I don't think that there are too many people who have not had that experience from a personal standpoint. And for me, I think that is really important to just share my own personal journey with that. And that is the fact that I lost a brother because my parents really experienced a great deal of oppression and had lack of access to the basic healthcare needs. And so when you have a personal experience of losing someone who's very dear to you, you understand that these things are real. on a personal level, but also on a national level. And so not only have I experienced it personally, I've seen my neighbors, have lactic excess and the kinds of things that they deal with. And I can tell you that the guilt that families experience, the pressure that it puts on them, it creates a high level of stress, and emotional stamina on them, because every parent want to provide the basic needs and the best opportunities that they have for their family and for their children. And when parents are deprived of the opportunity to provide those basic needs, then it hits hard, and it affects, families, it affects communities. And just in terms of a solution based approach, it's really important to look at insurance, to look at no one, regardless of their income or their race or whatever their background is, should be denied opportunities. And the way that our society is structured, the less you have, the less opportunities you have. The more you have, the greater opportunities and access you have. It is just it's backwards. People who have greater opportunities are given more, and people who have less are given less, and it just makes no sense. And I think that for us to just reevaluate the systems that we construct that continues to produce these barriers and these outcomes are the first things that we need to consider as we are implementing and addressing real change when it comes to these disparities.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. And just starting that off, just quickly, I'll add that when we declare racism as a public health crisis, it helps to take the onus off of the individual, right? Because let's be honest, I think many people feel that people are in a position in life because they put themselves there. This is a very different situation. Now, that may be for some people, but this is a systemic issue and it's been called out. So that's a big deal to call this out on a big level. So declaring it takes the onus off of the individual. To build a healthier country in general, we have to confront the systems and the policies that have resulted in the generational injustice that's given, rise to racial and ethnic health inequities. In April 2021, the Joint Commission Journal on Quality and Patient Safety outlined 4 key steps that health system leaders need to take in order to identify and eliminate healthcare disparities. So one is even recognizing that healthcare disparities are a gap in the quality of care delivered, because not everyone sees it that way, right? So just recognizing it and making sure that they know that it exists in every health system and are health system failures that occur at many levels, not just any one level. So we have to attack it at all levels. Number 2, declaring it from the highest levels of their organization. So not just the frontline workers, but from the CEO on down. The board of directors, that they declare that the work is important and that leadership is also going to be held accountable. They don't just send things to the frontline workers and then they walk away. It's got to be that important. 3, ensuring that any disparities are made transparent and reported as part of the standard set of quality metrics, like anything else, like hypertension, diabetes. Make it a reportable item. And then number 4, committing to increasing the diversity of their senior leadership ranks and those on the front lines as well. It matters more that there are people who even care about this work, but it's nice when patients see their own there to help take care of them too, especially if you want this done immediately, then we can work on everything else. So hopefully that made sense to you. And that is something that hopefully people will take into their health systems.
I love that. There's some stuff that we need to do right now today. And there are broader systemic things from multiple fronts, frontline all the way up. Thank you both for those really compelling answers. I think that sparks a lot of conversation and calls for reflection in our systems, in our health systems. So my next question is for Becky. So we know that there is a shortage of safe and affordable housing in West Michigan. That's not news to anybody who's recently looked for a house or an apartment. Mm-hmm. The question is, what are some of the systemic changes or solutions from a housing perspective that can address this issue as racism as a public health crisis?
Yes, thank you, Cherise. I really wanted to underscore and emphasize what Dr. Kennedy just mentioned in declaring racism as a public health crisis that helps to address the systems that are in place. And when we look at housing in this country, it was designed to be a racist system. When you look at the segregation in our neighborhoods, that's not by accident. That the system is working exactly the way that it was intended to work. When you look at policies and government-backed sanctioned policies that exclusively prohibited Black people from home ownership, the system is working exactly how it was supposed to work. And so addressing it as a public health crisis helps us to look at that system as a system and put efforts into dismantling that system. And I think it's important when we talk about any solution, it needs to come at an angle that includes all of the systems that are interacting with one another. It can't just be housing. It has to be, how does housing and education and healthcare, how do all of those systems interact with one another to perpetuate and play out the racism that we're seeing in people. And 100%, I think that focusing on equitable outcomes and centering the voices of people who are being negatively impacted, that's where we start in coming up with solutions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Becky. I think understanding the intersection of systems, I think we often look at things in silos, and if we fix this one system, then everything else is taken care of. And it definitely has to be a holistic approach. So there's another system that we can connect with. And I would love to direct my next question to Tracy Brain to talk about one more system. And so your work in the Innocence Project is about freeing innocent people and helping transform the legal system. So how does declaring racism as a public health crisis help in that regard? And from your perspective, what are some of the systemic issues and solutions in the systems that you're navigating in that can be addressed?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I love that you included this particular system in the conversation, even though it's about public health, because Ms. Diffett is absolutely right. It is all interconnected. And obviously the people that we see who interact with the criminal justice system often have issues around housing and around health and around education and all of those things. So it really is connected. And like the housing system, right? So I've worked in the criminal justice system my entire career. And not unlike the housing system, it's a system that from the beginning, right, was organized around controlling Black people and controlling Black bodies. Took the place of organized chattel slavery in the 1800s and 1900s and became, another way of extracting labor and again, implementing control over a population that was inherently viewed as inferior, less intelligent, more violent, et cetera. And so we can't talk about how to solve these problems without acknowledging that. And so, I'll begin just by reiterating the promising thing about declaring issues like this. A public health crisis is exactly what everybody else has said, which is naming it and calling it out, not only taking the onus off of the victims, but also giving language, right, to people to think and to speak about this. So, when I talk to audiences about the history of the criminal justice system and the disparities that we still see, people sometimes have these aha moments when they connect the dots, right? When they realize that when we're talking about police brutality, for example, we're not just talking about Officer Jones and whether or not, he's racist or might have bias against, the people that he's stopping, but rather, we're talking about the legacy of systems that were. So despite the intentions of the people today in 2022, right, even the well-intentioned people today in 2022 are working within a system that was designed centuries ago, right, with different purposes in mind. And we have to acknowledge that, both in terms of how we change it and in terms of how it impacts people going through that system today. So, of course, in my work, right now, currently, I work in the Innocence Project, and our focus is on freeing the wrongfully convicted. But I've been working with, indigent defendants in the criminal justice system, again, for the last 25 years or so, and definitely see how systemic racism, plays out from the beginning, from the very, very beginning, right, of the system all the way through now working with people who've been incarcerated for decades as they try to obtain their freedom. And we know, right, we all know that there are a disproportionate number of people of color in the criminal justice system compared to our, the numbers in the population. We know that this particularly affects inner city neighborhoods and Black men, and those numbers just are what they are. And so again, the question is why and what to do about it. And so there is a tendency among, majority communities, but even sometimes within our own community, to try to explain those things away on individual basis, right? Oh, these communities need to do this, and we need to take responsibility, and we need to concentrate on school, and need to do better, and need to avoid crime, and all those things are true, but it doesn't, again, look at the big picture. It doesn't look at the fact that young Black kids from the time that they are very young are treated differently with respect to discipline and consequences, even in school, suspended more often in school from the age of even preschool, right? Have different experiences with respect to discipline and consequences in school that, all the way through their preschool, elementary, middle school, high school years. So by the time they're in high school, right, they've already been labeled as troublemakers. They already are seeing, law enforcement in their school, right? They're already being viewed differently than other people. And that leads them too often, disproportionately into the criminal justice system. It affects not only how our kids see themselves, right, but also how police departments, police officers, how policymakers see them, right? How they decide which communities they're going to police, how they're going to police, who they're going to arrest, right? How, what charges they're going to file, what sentences they're going to recommend. And that, system of criminalizing Black youth from an early age, right, permeates the entire system and affects how each of us, right, treats those kids all the way through the system and until they become adults. And that's what we have to recognize. And I'll tell a very short anecdote. Years ago, I was at a dinner at the home of a very wealthy white family, and very nice people. And we were sitting around the table telling icebreaker stories. And one of the members of the family, he was in his maybe late 20s at the time. And his icebreaker story was the story about his senior prank and how he and his friends had broken into the high school and modified the bell, right? The bell that rings in between classes, taking the dongs out of the bell. That's probably not the right word, but made it so that the bell couldn't ring. And it was just a hilarious prank. They propped the window open during the day. They surreptitiously went in at night, messed with the bell. And then the next day, the vice principal couldn't get the bell to ring. And it was just hilarious. Nobody could figure out what happened. Nobody could figure out who did it. And days went by, nobody had figured out who did it. And this group of young men, they were just upset that they didn't get credit for their prank. So they actually turned themselves in, right? So they could get credit for this ingenious senior prank. And I'm sitting here listening to the story thinking, had that been my son, right, breaking into the high school in the middle of the night for a senior prank, I would be visiting him at one of the, several lovely facilities around Michigan that house, right, so many of our young Black. And it's just an example of, young white boys get to be young teenage white boys who do stupid things and are immature and right and people think it's funny. Young Black kids don't get to do that, right? They just don't get to do that, right? Because of those systemic things. So I could talk about this issue all day, but again, I think the benefit of calling it out and calling it a public health system gives us the language to talk about it in similar ways that we have recognized that we should treat people, we should consider the mental health, right, when we consider the criminal justice system, that we should consider youth when we consider, right, how we deal with people who interact with the criminal justice system. And similarly, we should consider the impact, all the things that you all are talking about, all of the strain and stress, anxiety, and disparities that result from systemic racism. We should consider that when we are arresting, when we're sentencing, and certainly, right, at the point of reentry when we're trying to help people integrate in society. So if we can, like I said, take those things into account at stages along the way, hopefully that can lead to better policy. And so.
Thank you so much. And that is such a helpful reminder that we essentially from birth are engaging and interacting with systems that can do great help or do great harm. And so this is a really good reminder that we spend our lifetimes engaged in systems in some way, shape, or form. So addressing this at systemic levels is incredibly important. So we've talked about a couple of systems, and I'm going to ask Lionel to help kind of tie this together for us a little bit here. So racism and its impact on the justice system and health disparities and lack of housing and employment, the environment, education, they're all connected. How, maybe you can help shed some light on how they're connected and how is the NAACP addressing these issues in such an intersectional way?
Thank you. So I am going to amplify just a couple of those and then talk about the tie-in and the NAACP. I want to talk for a second about employment discrimination and how serious of an issue it is here in West Michigan, but particularly across the country, but definitely in West Michigan. You know, there's a guy named Dr. Willie Jennings. You guys may or may not have heard of him. Born and raised in Grand Rapids on Franklin and Eastern, actually. Graduated from Calvin, now serves as professor of systemic theology at Yale Divinity School. He has a book, a commentary on the book of Acts, where he compares the new Christians in the book of Acts to Blacks in America, and that the parallel is that they both worship under the constraints of empire. Blacks worship and live and work under the constraints of empire in the United States, just like the new Christians did under the empire of Rome, the Roman Empire. This is what Dr. Jennings has to say about being Black and working in the United States. So remember, this is a brother who was brought up on Franklin and Eastern. They live always on the verge of being classified an enemy, always an evaluation of their productivity to the empire, always having acceptance on loan, ready to be taken away at the first sign of sedition. That is the Black employment experience in West Michigan. Your acceptance is always on loan. They're always ready to classify you an enemy. Your acceptance is ready to be withdrawn at the first sign of sedition. And what we need is stronger policy to make sure, and advocacy and activism to make sure that there's a way to rebut that. And I'm going to talk more about that, but I want to move on for the sake of time about healthcare. I want to share my own personal healthcare story, and then I'll talk a little bit about environment and we'll tie it in. This has been my experience with the healthcare system. My doctors, because of some experiences I've had medically, and it's no slight to any race or national origin, but I tend to prefer Black female physicians because of experiences that I've had. So I have a physician of color who was out, and there was a white male physician, the 2020 white male physician. It was during the height of the pandemic. I was feeling bad, horrible, sleepy all the time. I couldn't see. Could hardly see. My son was 10 feet away, had a green shirt on. I just saw a green blob. Losing weight like crazy, like 12 pounds in a week and a half. I called the doctor. My doctor was out. There was a white male doctor that was assisting me. He wanted me to take a COVID test. He didn't want to hear anything about any of my symptoms. Go take a COVID test. But I understand I'm tired. Yes, I know that there are some symptoms that are identical to COVID, but I'm having problems with my vision. Go take a COVID test. No matter what I said, the guy was not trying to hear me and actually began being condescending. And so he would not talk to me until I took a COVID test. This is a Wednesday. I called to schedule a COVID test, could not get in until Friday. Friday, I took the COVID test. It was going to be 48 to 72 hours before I got my results. My wife and my mother said, "You look horrible. You're going to the emergency room right now." I went to the emergency room, had diabetes, had a blood sugar of almost 1,000, 980. The doctor said, "God must have a plan for your life because you should be dead or in diabetic coma." And I ended up being in the hospital for a week. Now, my doctor, after I talked to her, she called, apologized, and tried to get the guy to call and apologize. But my point here is I have firsthand experience of coming this close to death because a doctor would not listen to me or take me seriously. And I strongly believe, I have no tests, like in the fair housing, those, fair housing, we do matched pair tests in fair housing. I don't have a test, but I'll tell you that I have a hard time believing that if I was a white male, that I would have been treated the same way. And this is our experience in the healthcare system. Now, environmentally, I don't know if anybody has had an opportunity to view the 2017 Neighborhood Action and Environmental Justice Report for Grand Rapids, conducted by Link Up and Detroiters for Environmental Justice. But there are some very interesting ties there between what we're talking about now and discrimination and how it all manifests itself in the environmental justice sphere. First of all, there was found that there was a high rate of vapor intrusion in Ward 3. Now, if you don't know the makeup of the city, Ward 3 is your ward that has the highest minority populated area. It's the highest minority populated ward in the city of Grand Rapids. Now, within that ward, you have the 49507 zip code, which is the area with the most Black folks. So you're gonna see a little theme here when we start talking about what was found in the environmental justice report. First of all, there were high rates of vapor intrusion in the 49507 area code, PCE and TCE. I mean, they're long, complicated words that I won't even try to enunciate, but you can look them up. But it has to do with underground vapor seeping through buildings that effectively cause damage to liver, cause liver damage, kidney damage, and immune system problems. And the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality took their time to address this. And this affected mostly Black people. Now, also in 49507, you may or may not know that several years ago, well, a few years ago, 49507 had the highest rate of child lead poisoning in the state of Michigan, exceeding Flint, Michigan. And that's 49507, that Black zip code again. We have some food justice issues that are environmental concerns. And the whole concept of food justice examines how racism serves as an impediment to those who can access nutrient-dense foods. And we found that impact is strongly along racial lines, specifically in the 49507 area code, in Ward 3, and in areas that now, here's the connect, these are also in areas that have the worst air quality, the highest level of environmental toxins. They also have the least access to healthy food, which is largely due to transportation issues, healthy food being a distance away that requires having a vehicle or some sort of transportation to get you there, and the presence of convenience stores that sell foods that are really low in nutrients, but they go because that's what they have access to. The study found that these environmental justice issues that predominantly affect Ward 3, and in particular the highly Black populated zip codes, you see high rates of learning and behavioral difficulties, obesity, diabetes, amputations, hypertension, heart disease, and maternal infant mortality. So we have some connectivity here. We talked about psychological safety earlier. We talked about the housing issue. Now, when you look at the fact that if we take something as simple as, well, not simple as, but let's just take vapor intrusion, for instance. Vapor intrusion is predominantly caused by dry cleaners or gas stations that have not properly cleansed all the toxins out of the ground, and then that property is now for sale or for lease. Somebody moves in there. So in an ideal world where no discrimination exists, what you'll see is the environmental toxins, the toxicity would be spread equally across the board. You see rate in Ward 1 or rate in Ward 2, as well as Ward 3, and it'd be spread across the zip codes. Everywhere where you see dry cleaners, gas stations, when they have or used to exist, you see it spread across the board. But for some reason, this stuff is just not cleaned out properly. when you deal with the minority zip codes and the highly populated minority ward. So we have this this reluctance to take seriously issues when they affect the minority population. One of the jokes, at least amongst my peer group, I see that this is an all-Black panel, and I don't want us to be considered a monolith, so I won't say it's in all of our peer groups, but I know in my peer group, one of the jokes that we had was that we thought it was mighty funny that we saw a lot of white folks concerned about COVID until they said it was affecting Black folks predominantly. Then next thing you know, the masks go off, the restaurants are packed, nobody cares about it. So this is what I mean, this reluctance to care about something if it seems to affect Black and brown folks. And that's what's happening here. Now, in terms of what the NAACP is doing, first of all, I apologize. I send greetings from Clee Jackson, the president of NAACP. He's doing great work over at the NAACP, and I'm honored to be a member there and serve under him. The NAACP is doing great work, and the primary thing they're doing right now is amplifying the community voice. And this is why membership is so important. Shameless plug, but also is very important because the members are a collaboration of people who live and work in the Grand Rapids metropolitan area. And so during their activities of daily living, they share their experiences at the meetings and with the group, and then we understand which issues need to be raised to the forefront, and that voice could be amplified collectively, and it can result in policy change, changes in practices, et cetera. So the NAACP is doing what we've always done, and that's really keeping the ear to the street, listening to the people, really looking at policy, particularly in areas of where overt and disparate impact discrimination exists, because we still have overt discrimination taking place, but there's also these policies and practices that are neutral on their face, allegedly, and they disproportionately affect a group of people. And we also get in there and dissect that and understand where those changes need to be made. And we also emphasize the movement in the strategy. There's activism, there's advocacy, there's policy change, and then there's policy evaluation. So activism is a strong piece of what we do, but we also pay close attention to the movement down the pendulum, the activism to the policy change evaluation, to protest, to sit in, to anything that is deemed a motion of activism is typically a first step in a larger strategy so that we can consistently, we really want to bring assertive and aggressive systemic change to the area. And that's what we're working on. So we really hope that people will join us and help to amplify their voices, because it's our experiences that inform what we're dealing with as a community.
Thank you so much, Lionel. It just seems like there are so many places and spaces for people to plug in. And that is, and ways to use their gifts, their voices, their talents to, as you said, amplify voices. So that actually lends to a great question I would love to pose to others in the group. So, in recent years, so many people of color and allies concerned about the injustices that we're witnessing and the results of systemic racism, they want to do something. And, it's one thing to give a gift, to write a check, to join, but what is it that people are constantly asking, what can I do today? But they don't know where to begin. So, and there's been a shift and beyond to get people to move beyond the hashtag and the posting or reposting something on social media, that kind of performative allyship or that surface level activism, to something more meaningful, more real. So what are those things? What would you say to somebody who wants to begin doing some real work in real ways? Open question to the group.
Okay.
How can they plug in?
I can start with that, and I make it real simple as well. Austin Channing Brown wrote a book called Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. And I had her speak at an event a few years ago. And one of the things that she talked about was that people know like what to do. They know how to change systems, and we can spin like our wheels like day and night, trying to come up with like strategies and new approaches and all kinds of like recommendations, like best practice recommendations that are proven to work, and it may just go out of the window. So just picking back on what Author Shannon Brown said is that what would you do if the issue impacted you? How would you use your voice? And what systems would you fight for? How many protests would you lead? And essentially, how will you pour yourself into affecting change and making sure that that change happens if that issue affected you and your family? And I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about that. And I know there's been a couple of issues, in the criminal justice space in which we've been able to move the ball forward because people were able to think more broadly about how, not just how the issue affects people of color, but how it affects society in general. Because I think, Reverend LeGrand, you're absolutely right. Sometimes people tend to think of things as other folks' problem, right? And it doesn't impact me. And so what I say to people when they say, kind of, how can I help? This is certainly part of it, the beginning of it, having these conversations. But I think one of the biggest things that allies could do and help is to be a different voice so that it doesn't just sound like it's the same people complaining about the same thing all the time, right? So, you find it all, I know I'm in meetings all the time and I might say something that falls on deaf ears, but, somebody else says it all of a sudden, no, that was, so whatever the audience is, right? Finding different audiences and finding who speaks to those audiences and being that voice. And so that it's not just sounding like it's people of color complaining about age-old problems, but rather, right, it's someone saying, yeah, they're not just making that up, right? And I can tell you because, right, I've been working in this space. So, we've seen that. I'm on the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission, and I noticed, it was finally, there was an awareness several years ago that there were disparities with respect to how indigent defendants were represented, right? Were being treated, what resources were being, kind of poured into systems to defend people who didn't have resources to hire lawyers. And of course, right, because there are a disproportionate number of people of color in those systems, that impacts, right, people of color often. But people of color, a group of allies was able from different sectors were able to kind of come together and show that not only does this impact people of color, not only does it impact poor people, but it impacts the very integrity of the criminal justice system. And so then you began to draw support from people who were concerned about the legal system in general, people who were concerned about issues of poverty, people were concerned about, the appearance of fairness, et cetera. So all of a sudden there were prosecutors on board, there were Republicans on board. And now when you say, it's a good thing for the defense to have similar resources as the prosecution, right? Because then that leads to better results, et cetera. Now, at least in certain, sectors, we take that for granted, which, we were not there, right? 10 years ago. And so, that was a very long effort, to draw in other voices to say, we're not just making this up. Can I show you? Right. And then, once you convince them, then to, kind of think about the players that you need in the room to make it happen and to address those people. But.
And I add really quickly too, I feel like there's a very organic way that allyship can develop from time we spend in community with each other. Just a very quick example of my daughter in school. Somebody was messing with her hair. She didn't like it. And, you don't mess with our hair. And her white friend stuck up for her and she recognized, a seventh grade child recognized her privilege in the moment. And she spoke up and she said, you can't do that. You're not supposed to touch her hair, leave her hair alone. And, that just spoke volumes to me that a child can recognize their privilege in the moment. And that happened through the relationship she has with my daughter. And it comes from being raised in a certain way, spending time in community with people that you care about. And, I care about this person. To Vanessa's point, what lengths will you go to advocate and speak up and speak up for people that you care about? Just say that.
Such a good answer.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I would just like to add a couple of other examples. And one is that when we had like the mask mandate and how many people disagreed with the mask mandate and the measures that they went to advocate and to fight against that. And a second one is that I taught a class on cultural diversity, and I had a project that the students had to do. And I gave them some critical feedback on one of their projects, and they had a fit, and they wrote letters, they called, they emailed, they did all kinds of things. But when it came to other things that we talked about in class, they were very silent about those kinds of things. And that's why it's so critical, to understand that when issues confront you, that you do know what to do and that you take the measures necessary to make sure that your voice is heard on those issues. But on another side of things, I from a different perspective, is that I do want to share, because I was just so grateful for the fact that when I started my new role at High, that the senior administration of Mercy Health. So when you want to think of like what allyship looked like, they initiated contact with me to have a meet and greet. And they also convened a group of nonprofits in the community to work with, to partner with, and to support, not just financially, but in advocacy in other ways. And I think that that's just a good model in terms of what I have experienced, with no strings attached, not going through hoops and, like writing 20-page grants to get some financial support. And so that's what advocacy looks like. That's what allyship looks like. And so I was just really moved by the fact that they initiated a meet and greet and sought out ways that they could support our organization.
So all great answers, and I'll just hop on to what some of you have said also, because there are many different ways to get involved. I'd say that I know a lot of times allyship, of course, comes from others who don't look like you or have been through the same things that you have been through. So in this case, for example, let's talk about being Black. You don't necessarily have to be Black, have to be female, have to be whatever marginalized person that you are. I think every single person on the earth has been made to feel less than in some way, whether it's ageism. I mean, you can be a white male and not have gotten that job because you're 62, as opposed to being 28, you know what I mean? So you take that feeling and you wonder, as Vanessa was saying, what would I like to have done in that situation? What if that happened to me again? What would I like somebody else to do? If someone was standing next to me, what would I like them to do, right? Because it comes down to being human. It's not just being Black, being female, blah, blah, blah. What can I do to make this person respected? So that's one thing that I'll say. The other is, I'm so proud to be associated with my organization. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on this call, but our organization really is about trying to teach people about equity, racism, LGBTQ issues, that kind of thing, from the top on down, like I was referring to some time ago. So in answer to your question, I think also if you happen to have a job or working for an employer that has these different pieces of information or different websites or other things that you can do to get involved, take that and do that out in the world too. Don't just do it at your job. They're teaching you how to be a better person and how to recognize other people as true people as well, whether you're an immigrant or other things. So if you're lucky enough to be aligned with an organization or an employer that does that kind of thing, hop on it, because this is the diversity, equity, inclusion time right now, more than any other time that I've seen in my life anyway. And I'm so proud of our organizational president, for example, our Mercy Health Physician Partners president, who is a white female, who really is about it. She's reading books. No one told her to do this. She's reading books. She's having uncomfortable conversations with our organization. People are quiet. Maybe they're just thinking about things, but that's how you do it. That's how you get involved. And don't be afraid to ask the questions. If you are someone who you don't feel like is in a marginalized group and you want to reach out to the NAACP, they'd probably be happy to hear from you. Listen, I'm being honest. I don't know what to do. What do I do? I'm sure that Lionel and others would be happy to tell you, in a very educational, wonderful way. So that's my way of answering that.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. I hear so much about just tapping into what makes you human and understanding that an important lesson for us is, I think, Vanessa, it was you who said it, we know what to do when it's important to us. So we're not tapping into something we don't actually know how to do. When it's important to us, we know how to show up. We know how to ask questions. We know how to fight for what's important to us. So the part of the trick is making it important to us and those we need to have at the table. And you've each of you have given some real tangible, today you can do this, today you can call. I want to take a step back for a second and know that these are conversations, I think it was Dr. Kennedy, you said, these are tough conversations. And when people put themselves out there, it can be challenging and it can be risky. And I think we've all experienced that time when we stepped into a conversation and it didn't go well, or there was that immediate backlash, that immediate redirection to something else, because I don't want to talk about this thing. So it's difficult with today's challenges and a lot of public scrutiny for people to, we have to understand, in order to understand today's challenges, we have to connect to the past, where these challenges came from. And it can be really tough in those conversations for people who don't see racism or haven't experienced the impact of it to really engage in that conversation. So how do we overcome that resistance to those conversations about the past and how the past impacts us today?
I'll say really quickly, just off to the start, I feel like recognizing when the past is described as the past, or, oh, it happened so long ago, I think we all need to recognize that as a tactic of white supremacy, because it was not actually that long ago. My great-grandmother, she died when I was 13. So I had long enough for me to develop a relationship with her. She was 3 years old in the year that Harriet Tubman died. So when you think about that, that's my grandma. That's my great grandma. I know her, and she was alive in the same time that Harriet Tubman was. That's not that long ago. We are not that far removed. You know, I bring up Ruby Bridges with my kids, and I say, you know, she's Grammy's age. That's the same age as your grandma, and it's, you know, foreign to them. I think it's a lie that we bought into, that it happened so long ago. We're past that, but it wasn't that long ago. And you know, the systems that were designed, that we had talked about, designed to keep people segregated, the effects of those are still lingering. We see that today, and it's, as much as possible, connecting the racism that we see today to what was established in the past, and making that connection, I think, is important.
And I think giving people space. So, you know, I teach sometimes a class at the law school called Race in the Supreme Court. And we talk about, you know, the legacy of racism in systems and legal systems in particular, and a lot of things that you just talked about, you know, about connections between the past and today, and how it wasn't that long ago, et cetera. And I always open the class by trying to reassure the students that it's a safe space, right? That the things that we're going to talk about, you know, amongst each other, and we're going to give each other space to be vulnerable, right, to show our ignorance. And I always say that I am not, you know, this Black woman up here telling you what to think and how to feel about racism, and, you know, that you owe me this or owe me that, but rather to have a dialogue. And again, you know, get to allow each other to make mistakes in that conversation. I think so many times, you know, we reach that point that you talked about, Clarice, when we get to this point where, you know, we start this conversation and somebody gets offended or somebody doesn't want to talk about it, and we never get past that. And I think that we're approaching that point now. So Dr. Kennedy, when you said that, you know, there's never been a time in your lifetime that D&I has been such a hot topic, I think you're right. But I think we need to strike now, because we're seeing a lot of kind of pushback now, a lot of trying to put it back in the closet. We don't want to talk about it anymore. And I'm hearing even people who were, you know, willing to do so at one point saying, okay, enough is enough, et cetera. And so I think we have to kind of push through that by continuing and it's hard sometimes because we get passionate about it, but giving people safe spaces and trying our best to open dialogue without coming out of the gate, making people feel vilified or making people feel, bad or whatever. And sometimes we can't control that, right? So I'm not saying we have to go out of our way to make people comfortable, but I do think just like we would want people to approach us to have a conversation about a difficult topic, that we need to do so in love, right? In honesty, right? But in love. And it doesn't always work, but I found that it helps.
2-second comment to Ms. Brain. Thank you so much for saying that. In all honesty, to keep it real, and maybe you all agree, I'm tired of talking about it too. So how do we both stop us from talking about it so much? That's how you bring it up.
There you go. I like it.
Thank you. I'm tired of it too.
I agree with Tracy. We have to push through. And the racism is in our face. We don't have to talk about the past. We can talk about the present. We have the first Black female Supreme Court justice going through confirmation right now, and we've seen nothing but racist attacks toward her and race baiting. These are conversations that can happen in the present, so we don't have to talk about slavery and that sort of thing. We can talk about what's happening right now. And I am of the firm belief that we just continue to amplify the occurrences. I am not as concerned about the discomfort of others as I am about seeing or realizing a just and equitable society. And at some point, if we're going to get tired of hearing about it, then we should probably make the requisite changes necessary so that we can move forward in the type of unity that we actually pretend to have as a nation. So, but this is a person that looks at things through an activist lens, and I'm aspiring liberation theologian. So I have a different take on it because my authority comes directly from God. And so I really don't deal with man's frustration when it comes to God's orders. I just push through and let God deal with the rest. I feel that if somebody is upset at me for exercising my anointing, then your problem is with God and you need to take it up with him. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and push through and fight for change.
Thank you, Lionel. Vanessa, I didn't want to miss you. You look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, I just think that everything has been so well stated. And I don't have really anything to add to that, but just something that comes to my mind often that I state often is that you can't heal what you're unwilling to reveal. And so part of the continuous conversations about race and racism and the issues that we're experiencing in our nation is rooted in the fact that we're not healing because people are still so in denial. And it's really hard when you think about, like the past, the historic kinds of issues, because often that is essentially denying the current present issues that we continue to experience. And sometimes when I think about it, I think about just the trauma, the generational trauma for centuries. And Black bodies, we are tired. We're not just tired of talking about it, we're tired of living it. And there's a significant difference in talking about it than living it. And so I would just like to leave with that. It's just imagine living it when you get frustrated talking about it.
Well said. I want to tap into some of the questions that have come through in our chats. I want to make sure that we catch at least some of them. And so for those of you who have questions, if we don't get to them, again, I really encourage you to reach out to our panelists and have an opportunity to continue this dialogue, because this is just today, hour and a half of our time. We are not going to change all of the systemic challenges that we have with an hour and a half conversation. So keep that conversation going and tap into the resources that are right here in front of us today. But I'm going to ask for a little bit of optimism from the group, because this can be really difficult work. And one of the questions that has come through the chat is on this issue of trust. And I forget who raised it, but trust in the system. And it's really difficult to navigate change and understand that the harm that's being done it's tough to overcome if we have an inherent distrust of the systems that have actually done harm. So the question that has come up is, how is this trust negotiated? Is it even a viable idea, understanding the history that we've had and who we're dealing with, who we're engaging with, who we're navigating? Open question to the group.
That's a tough one. That's, back in 2017, I was working on the new human rights ordinance for the city of Grand Rapids, which I ultimately passed in 2019. But in the period of that advocacy and organizing different community groups around it, I actually wrote an appeal to the citizens of Grand Rapids in the Rapidian, and that was titled Negotiations for White Space. And we were talking about the quest to pass a civil rights ordinance in Grand Rapids, and it largely dealt with the history of mistrust and how to regain trust. I think we have to, in terms of trusting a group, a system, a set of policies that has constantly let us down. That's difficult. I think the trust has to lie in ourselves, in our God, and in the fundamental concept of fairness and equity, that at some point, if we work hard enough and we stick together and work collaboratively, we can see the change that we fight for. But I think that's where the trust is. I think it's a stretch to say, we can trust a system that has been, the panelists have talked about this over and over again since we've been on this call, how the system has been set up not to benefit us, the housing system. We can get into banking policies. You could close your eyes, pick a policy and show how, trace it back to how it's not set up for us. So it's, I think it's a stretch to say, how can we trust that? I think we can trust in our higher power and trust in our ability to properly advocate for change.
A lot of trust comes from, and I'm not going to say anything particularly wise, but just so that everyone puts it into place. A lot of trust comes from being with that other person or that other organization or that other doctor for a certain period of time. You may gain trust immediately, or you may need to trust them immediately. Say you have a cancer diagnosis or something, you don't have time to develop trust, you just got to trust them. But most of the time, we have some time to develop a relationship. If someone comes over to my house and they don't take off their shoes when they walk on my floor, I can't necessarily judge them because I have not told them, hey, I appreciate you being here, but I'd like for you to remove your shoes and just, wear some socks or offer them some socks and then, offer them some water, have a nice conversation, right? So they know what your rules are. I know what their rules are after a time. They may not know it initially, but it's got to be a series of conversations, and the conversations have to be had. I know that sounds very basic, but honestly, I forget who this is just because I'm on this call, somebody famous. I don't remember if it was a president, but they said the only way to trust someone is to trust them, right? So you do it. And then if there's a breach, okay, then you have that conversation thereafter, you find out why that is. Maybe they need to learn something. Maybe there was a misunderstanding on your end, right? But there's got to be the conversation, and it's going to take time. This isn't something that's going to happen in 2 seconds. Assuming the best of intentions can help greatly, even in our own families. Forget the world. How about auntie? Can you trust your auntie with this thing or with your kid? Start there. Yeah, so give it time and just do it. Keep in mind that others may not have that information that they need. You may have to do some teaching also, and you can't get away from it. You might have to do some teaching, but start that conversation with whoever it is that is, and trust them a little bit.
I love that. I love that. And I would just, I love all of that. And then just kind of showing ourselves as trustworthy as well. And I think that's something that we take for granted. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I think we're all kind of inherently well-intentioned, et cetera, but it just kind of goes back to what I was saying about kind of displaying and exhibiting the attitude and the approach that we want to see in other people. And that could get tiring, right? Like you were talking about I'm tired of talking about this, right? I'm tired of being, I'm tired of being nice. I'm tired of being diplomatic. I'm tired of being whatever. But just even being our genuine selves unchangingly, right? And in an open way, that invites that trust, and like you said, Dr. Kennedy, and until that trust is breached, showing ourselves to be approachable and accessible and open. I think about, so for example, we talk about showing our own vulnerabilities. One of the things that's come out of, I think of recent societal conversations about LGBTQ issues is that I find that my middle schooler has all this language to talk about it that I never had. So she will come home and tell me that, so-and-so identifies as this week, and their name is this week, and that's foreign. That's, not how I grew up. That's foreign to me. I love all of it. Do you, but sometimes I'll, have this look on my face and say, what now? And my daughter will say, mom, you got to get with it. Okay. You got to understand. And so, so even though I don't always understand, and that's an evolving area for me, so I try to be open and trustworthy, and it shows and it plays out. So I went to my daughter's orientation for high school, and she wasn't with me for reasons that are not relevant here, but I had her on FaceTime, and I was telling her, here, meet your English teacher, here are all the organizations that you could join, during the school. And there was one organization that was a ally organization, the Gay Straight Alliance or something like that. And I said, and here's the Gay Straight Alliance. And I'm passing by. The next day, her friend said, oh my God, your mom is so cool, because they heard me going down the hall, showing that to her, because their parents were maybe looking askew at it and, stay away from that organization or what have you. But her parent, and she was able to say, oh, my mom doesn't care about that stuff. My mom says, you do you, et cetera, et cetera. But, that was just a little anecdote to show that hopefully I built some trust, right, with her friends or her, or her people in her world, even her who might be dealing with that stuff, exploring those kind of stuff by showing myself to be open and admitting what I don't understand and seeking to understand. So hopefully, if we are like that and don't walk around like we know all the answers, and that hopefully will invite that same attitude in other people.
I love that. Thank you. And all of if I don't say it at the end, I'll say it now. Thank you all for sharing so much of yourselves, because this work, the time and space we're trying to occupy is deeply personal. And if we can't, I think, Tracy, to your point, if we can't bring our authentic selves to it, it's going to be really difficult. And that does require a level of vulnerability and trust to say, I'm going to tell you a story about myself, about my kids, about my grandmother. That's that authentic relationship building that I think Becky was talking about, that time and space with each other. So thank you for giving of yourselves in this space. So I would love to open up just broadly and kind of open-ended question to each of you, and hopefully each of you take some time to respond. But as we get ready to kind of wrap things up, what is it that you want this 100 some odd people that are tuning in right now to know? What is the message, the call that you want to leave with them today?
So I could say anything. I'm just going to say this quickly. One of my best friends has a saying I use all the time because it's so true. There are 3 sides to every story: my side, your side, and the truth. I would really encourage anyone listening or watching later on to think about whether or not you actually have the truth. We all have biases. I don't care what race, ethnicity, gender you are. Think about whether or not you have the truth. And if you're not positive and you don't have anything backing it up, keep looking for it until you find it.
I would just reiterate, we talked about earlier with respect to pushing through, pushing through that kind of frustration and tiredness or pushback that you get back from people. Continue to explore approaches, explore, audiences, et cetera, but don't let the opposition silence you. because I think that's what's going on right now. And it's going to be really tempting to throw up your hands, and particularly those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to work in our spaces and go home to nice homes and have and we can say, you know what, I'm gonna go to the soccer game. I just can't do something, right? But just keep pushing through, and rest when you need to, but don't let them silence you.
I'd say, so in the study of theology, there's a word, teleology, which is the doctrine of design and purpose in the material world. Effectively, there is a teleological link between humankind and the earth. And we have to remember that we are technically one race, and that's the human race. And so when we refuse to acknowledge racism and its effects on public health, it effectively disintegrates the collective quality of life of the entire human race, because there's a connectivity between all humans that needs to exist for God to accomplish what he is trying to accomplish through the human race on the earth. Howard Thurman once said, the penalty of deception is to become deception with all sense of moral discrimination vitiated. So as we pretend that racism doesn't exist, as we pretend that there are no effects on public health, what happens is the moral discrimination of the human race is slowly disintegrated, and we start to feel its effects collectively. So I think I'd just like to leave everybody with understand that although there are a segment of people that may think this does not affect them, it actually does affect your quality of life. The fact that if you're a person that has to come in the house stomping and complaining because you're tired of hearing about racism, and you're taking 20 minutes with your family ranting at family dinner because you're frustrated with the conversation on racism, that is in fact diminishing your quality of life. So I think we should all understand that we are one connected race, the human race, and we need to work together to eliminate this poison, this evil called racism.
Great. And you can go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. I just really quickly, I think that we talked about how the past informs the present and also the future. And the past also impacts our acuity, our emotional responses, and our behavior in the way that we see, engage, and value each other. And our ancestors have, many of them created a very divisive nation and set up systems of oppression, of superiority and inferiority. And those systems have been rooted in the soil, and they have manifested and been pervasive throughout our society. It doesn't have to stay that way. And as Lionel so eloquently stated, it affects all of us. It doesn't just affect the oppressed, but it affects the oppressor as well. And so when we look at health issues, we have a lot of health equities and disparities related to race. But when you're dealing with, hate or racism, and you're exhibiting those behaviors, then it is affecting you as well. And so we need to look at the full scope of this disease and this virus, and be very proactive and intentional in this next chapter, of our lives and experiences, and realize that it doesn't have to be this way. We can affect change.
So really quickly, I don't know that I'll have anything as profound to say as the other panelists, but what I did want to say is to my white friends and colleagues who are listening to this, to really understand that we can't be in a position of taking a pass, or I'm just going to sit by and not participate, and to really remember Dr. King's caution about the white moderate. Either you are in it and you are fighting intentionally against racism, or you've chosen the side of the oppressor, and to really take those words into consideration. And to my Black, Indigenous friends of color who are on the phone or on the call, just to remember to really take care of yourselves, to take care of each other, take care of our family. I tell you, like I told a friend of mine told me a couple of years ago that our energy is so precious and it is so important, and to preserve your energy when you need to, and really just to take care of yourselves.
I love that, Becky. Thank you for that. And I'm going to throw a curveball to all of you because we have a little bit of time. There's, Tracy, you mentioned, take time for yourself, care for yourself. Becky, lots of opportunities for us to do that. So I am curious, and I would imagine our audience is curious as well. In all of the heavy work that you all are doing, you've dedicated your lives to this. How are you taking care of yourselves? How do you take care of yourself?
For me, it's my kids. They, being a mom, I'm a mom of 3, and there's ups and downs, but at the end of the day, the little one can just smile at me with his crooked teeth, missing teeth, and that does it for me. Time with my family, my kids, in spaces like this where I can be with other people who understand, and I don't have to go into the details of why this is a problem for me, why this is affecting me. Spaces like this give me all kinds of energy. So that's how I do self-care.
I'm a big proponent of, I'm sorry. I'm a big proponent of physical exercise. I love to play sports more than watch it, believe it or not. Not that I'm looking down on anyone that does, because I caught some of that March Madness stuff on Sunday. But I do a lot of different types of exercise. Spend time with my husband, who makes me laugh even when he doesn't mean to. He's hilarious. He puts things into perspective. My mom and brother out in New York, I stay in contact with them too. They tend to ground you. Things are going crazy around you, even during COVID, and you talk to them, it's like, poof, I'm okay, And I'm spiritual as well. I was brought up in the church, and I'm non-denominational now, but God is everything. You have to have something that grounds you. So whether it's your child or something else, something has to keep you sane. So all those things help me with self-care. Yeah,
same here. My faith and my family. I actually am very blessed to have a hilarious crew at home too that I love hanging out with, watching movies with. They can make jokes out of anything. I mean, just straight up stand-up routines. My wife and my 10-year-old are just funny, and I hit the gym. It was more out of necessity, and now I actually enjoy it. So before it was like punishment, like taking some Brussels sprouts, but now it's I actually enjoy it, and it is relaxation. And we're always looking for just different things to do to relax and decompress. So that's pretty much how I handle it.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar. I would add maybe 2 words to mine on top of all those, and those would be Stevie Wonder. I love Stevie Wonder. I'm a Stevie Wonder fanatic, just a music aficionado in general. God gave me a great appreciation for music, though no inherent talent to perform, which is probably a good thing. So love to listen to music, and I am a sports mom. I absolutely love sports, playing, watching it, you name it. So I've been watching March Madness, and I'm headed out tonight to go watch my son play soccer down in Texas. So that I turned into a whole different person on the sideline.
That's great. Well, I'm a serious baby boomer, and baby boomers are always like taking care of other people. But in terms of my own self-care, like Dr. Kennedy, I have a husband that I can't be too serious at home because, and daughters that are like extreme, like jokesters, they can be like stand-up comedians. And so we have a lot of fun, like just kind of laughing and being goofy and silly at home, and just surrounded by family and friends that just keeps me centered and relaxed. So
Beautiful. I love that you all had easy answers to that, because that means you're actually doing it. So that's a gift. I can't thank you all enough. It is amazing. Time flies when you're talking about changing the world. And there's so much dialogue, so much collaboration and work that needs to happen. And I really hope that we all, in all places and spaces in the community, are doing our work and are doing our part. So I thank you all immensely again for all of our wonderful panelists, Becky Diffin, Tracy Brame, Dr. Kennedy, Vanessa Green, Lionel Legrone. Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. I hope that we have done our job in inspiring our audience to create lasting change. Your voice, your advocacy give us the will, and your financial support gives us the way. So we really encourage you to visit our website and learn about the different ways that you can not only contribute, but also be a part of our mission, of the mission of our partners to eliminate racism in our community. We hope that you will join us for our next Let's Talk series, our next Let's Talk conversation on justice, LGBTQ+ and justice on May 12th, as well as our spring fundraiser Arise on April 21st. So stay tuned for more details about those. Be on the lookout for additional information, as well as a recording and a survey from today's talk, because we hope you share this conversation and this dialogue with your networks, with your peers. I thank you all so very, very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
You too. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having us, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
You
And thanks
too.
to all the panelists. You guys were great.
You too.